So I think this is actually one of the first questions that people often come up against when they first become politically active. So I suppose it's quite appropriate, isn't it, that it's one of our first meetings today. It's something that often my parents would kind of throw at me, you know, oh, you're against everything, aren't you? You're anti-war, you're anti-nuclear weapons, you're an anti-capitalist or whatever. What are you actually for? What are you fighting for? So this is kind of my attempt to explain what I'm fighting for today. I mean, I think for a lot of people, actually, socialism is a bit back on the agenda, isn't it? You know, I mean, it was the most Googled word, actually, in 2015, which was kind of attributed a bit to Bernie Sanders, actually. I mean, maybe people saw Jeremy Corbyn speaking at Glastonbury Festival, you know, apparently one of the biggest crowds ever they've had there and watched by millions of people at home. You know, this isn't even sort of counting his success at the recent election. And even Nigel Farage tweeted that Glastonbury Festival was full of Marxists, and that's what you were getting if you were voting for the Labour Party. So maybe he knows something we don't. I don't know. But actually, being a socialist and socialism means lots of different things to lots of different people, but it's great that people do identify as a socialist and with socialist ideas. When we talk about socialism, we're actually talking about quite a drastic and dramatic changing of society. I'm hoping to go through some of the ideas behind that, but there's quite a lot of ground to cover, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of discuss these things in more detail over the weekend, actually, where there's kind of meetings on almost everything I talk about today. So the first thing to say is a bit of a caveat, actually, and that's to say that when we talk about what socialism might be like or could be like, it's difficult to be as specific as a lot of people want you to be, actually. I'm not going to be able to say how exactly things are organised, you know, I'm not going to be able to give you a date for the revolution or anything, or how things will take their exact form. Because actually socialism and what socialism looks like is going to be dependent on the people fighting for it, actually. It's not going to be decided by me or, you know, even the sort of, academics or the rest of it. And what will matter is the context and the conditions in which they're fighting for it, actually. The meeting doesn't end there. It's not like we can't have a good crack at it. So I'm going to try and see what it could be like. Because we get an indication, actually, of what socialism might look like by examining the current contradictions within capitalism and seeing how capitalist development actually makes socialism possible. We can also look at how people have organised themselves in past struggles to give us kind of an idea of what it might look like. And like I said, I can't be maybe as specific as I would like to be, but we can say that it's going to be a society that is where production is based on need rather than profit. We can say there's going to be an abolition of classes within society, and there's going to be collective ownership of the main means of productions. What it looks like is going to be decided by workers taking action, actually, in the mass movement, trying stuff out and figuring out kind of what works for them. You know, Karl Marx wrote a lot of things, didn't he? But he didn't write that much about actually the sort of specifics of what socialism would look like. He wasn't actually the first person to dream of a better world, though, was he? Because before Marx, there was actually the utopian socialists who developed lots of really interesting, actually, and imaginative ideas about what kind of collective, harmonious world that we could live in. They developed brilliant critiques of class society that shed light on actually what a wasteful, illogical and unjust system it is. But what's really great about Marx and Engels is they looked beyond this, they looked beyond the wishful thinking and actually identified the specific situations inherent in capitalism that make a future socialist society possible, because they saw how a system based on exploitation, where the majority make a profit to be consumed by the bosses, actually develops and entrenches class divisions and antagonisms within society. And they spoke about how capitalism creates its own grave diggers by actually collecting together vast numbers of people of the exploited working class in huge workplaces. And it is in these workplaces, isn't it, collectively, where people experience exploitation. but also where people unite to win battles from seemingly the smallest things, you know, petitioning maybe to make tea breaks a little bit longer, maybe taking industrial action over an unfair, going on to bigger battles like an industrial action over an unfair dismissal, over paying conditions, or something like that. And this is actually one of the central contradictions within capitalism, because in order for it to function on a daily basis, it's actually collecting and uniting the only group of people with the ability and the common interest to destroy it. But Marx and Engels actually talked, you know, sort of almost glowingly about the wonders of capitalist production and how it makes this possible. Because actually, its competition is woven into the fabric of capitalism. You know, when everything is geared towards making and maximising a profit, you know, it does have an impact. Because it is this drive for accumulation and competition with other businesses that actually spurs on capitalist production. And this desire for profit leads to greater and greater technological and productive advances in society. So we've identified a couple of the ways in which it's possible. So let's actually have a look at it, because the foundation of socialism does lie in the economy, and the working class will need to use its political power to take into its hands the main means of production. And by the means of production, we mean, you know, all the facilities and the resources, you know, needing to produce goods in society. So, for example, you know, the factories and the kind of the plants that make everything, we're going to take those over. How does this start? Well, it starts with nationalisation, where we'll take over the kind of the major firms and industries. This is different from the nationalisation we've seen in the past from capitalist governments. You know, I mean, for example, the government's supposed to have nationalised the banks in like 2009, wasn't it? But, you know, the bankers still got their huge bonuses, they're still raking in loads of money, and I don't think we've got any control or say over how the banks behave. You know, this is because it's going to be different, because the workers' power will be controlled by the workers' state, which is going to be an organisation of the collective working class. It's different to nationalisation by the capitalist state, who are an organisation of the capitalist class. And this is going to combine legal takeover at the top with workers' action at the base. There's going to be nationalisation without compensation, because the Richard Bransons and the Philip Greens of this world, they're not getting their money back. You know, we're trying to break their economic hold, aren't we? You could begin to see a situation where each workplace or factory is going to be run actually by the workers. It's going to be run by an elected council, and these are going to be accountable to mass meetings of the workforce. This type of democracy doesn't stop there, doesn't stop with each individual factory. It exists on a whole industry level, with representatives from trade unions and the workers' government. Workers' control is really important actually, because you know, if workers can't control its own workplaces, it's never going to be able to control its own state and its own sort of society. And actually, it's quite fundamental to our idea of socialism. It's the sort of the untapped potential of the working class in running society. Something you hear all the time if you're kind of out campaigning as a socialist is, you know, oh, it's all very nice on paper, but actually workers can't really control things. You know, really we need the managers. We just don't quite get it. They're like a special group of people, and they understand the world. Actually, I think this attitude really grossly underestimates the abilities of working class people, and I think, actually, rather than keeping things running and produced, managers are actually there to sort of ensure that the exploitation doesn't go interrupted, isn't it? I mean, of course, we're going to need technical experts, we're going to need people with specialities under socialism, just like capitalism, but instead they're going to be under the direction of ordinary people, they're going to be under the direction of the workplace council, not the bosses like today. So for example, under socialism, everyone's not going to be given a scalpel and told they can be a brain surgeon. This is another kind of misnomer that you hear on the street sometimes. But what we are saying is that, you know, what type of operations are made, you know, the kind of conditions that people live in, how hospitals are built and maintained. Those decisions are going to be made by the hospital council. They're not going to be made by the overpaid managers of today. And once workers' control of industry is established, it's possible to sort of see a planned economy. It's not going to be like the state planning that we see today, where the Tories just kind of tell us, you know, they're going to take 10 million from the NHS or 6 million from the universities in the next few years. Because this is going to be different because socialist planning, working class people are actually the subjects of the plan, not the objects. They're making the decisions. And the decisions are going to be made at a local and a workplace level, which is then going to feed upwards into national and government plans. You know, these plans are going to be drawn up, debated, amended, and so on. There's going to be this real flourishing of democracy that you'll see in every aspect of life. I mean, first of all, a planned economy would be able to, solve the worst economic problems, like unemployment, but also offer up quite serious implications, quite serious possibilities for the future. Because actually I think an internationally planned economy would be transformative to our world. It will mean that both the human-made and the natural resources which are destroyed and wasted can be utilised. I mean, for example, if you just take the cost of war, both in lives but also in kind of pounds and dollars, this will be saved. I mean, Trident costs £6 billion every year just to maintain. I mean, just imagine what that difference that money could make. Just Trident alone. You're not even counting the cost of kind of non-nuclear weapons, the trauma of war, and all the effort and expense that goes into maintaining and arming huge groups of people. We're also going to be able to remove all the wasted labour that goes into advertising products or making duplicated versions of products for different companies. Actually, the things that are produced, they're going to be produced to a much higher quality because they're not being made for profit, actually. So, the materials that we use will be durable, they'll be safe, but also the people making them, they'll be well rested, well fed, and actually have an interest in the productive output. There's going to be a huge development of productive forces, actually, in a way, far beyond what we can kind of imagine now. I think we've got the blinkers on a little bit from capitalism, and it's going to be possible to provide the basic needs, the basic necessities of human life. Food, clothing, housing, and so on. There's going to be no more famine or food banks or homeless shelters. I mean, that is an amazing achievement. I mean, just think what that would look like where everyone had enough of the basics. I mean, you can start to see how this might happen. For example, there would be an immediate expansion of social care. Free prescriptions, free travel, free university. I mean, this is not pie in the sky stuff. This is something that is offered to people, even under Tory Britain, some people are eligible for free prescription, free university and so on. From the beginning, there's going to be great equalisation, isn't there? You can see how this would happen. The wages of all low-paid workers are going to go up, and the wealthiest in society, they're going to get a massive pay cut, and all the millions and the billions that the fat cats hoard and sit on, we're going to invest that in the NHS and build homes, but for people, not for profit. But our vision stretches much further than the basics, doesn't it? Because production will be organised in a collective, rational way, it is feasible to see a state in socialism where production has developed to such a degree that supply outstrips demand. For example, instead of having empty homes, unemployed builders and homeless people, we're going to solve these three problems that we're told are not related under capitalism, and we're going to put homeless people in empty homes and build more houses. Ideas about abundance is important, this having enough of everything, because actually capitalism tells us that the basic things we have are luxuries, we should be thankful for them, and actually makes us fight for the very basics in society. But actually, with a rational and a long-term plan, with humans placed at the centre of production and deciding how and when things are produced, ordinary people democratically deciding things, we can see a time when everyone does have enough of everything. Now, socialism stretches quite a lot further than production, actually. We can see how it can start to solve some of the problems that you have posed by capitalism, because I think actually one of the greatest challenges facing all of those interested in a better world is that of climate change, actually, because at the moment we're faced with kind of temperatures rising, and it seems a little bit, we're faced with climate catastrophe, actually, all while big businesses and governments can simply close their ears to warnings from scientists. and also ignore agreements like COP21. They can simply decide not to implement them. I mean, capitalism at its core has these competing blocks of capital, doesn't it, that do anything to maximise profits through the exploitation of workers. And of course this has an impact on the natural world. This ruthless extraction of natural resources, unsustainable processes like fracking, and rising pollution seemingly without end. And we think actually a socialist society could be an ecologically sustainable world. Because under socialism, production would become transformed. It would no longer be for profit. So, for example, in 2009, a leading wind turbine factory was closed on the Isle of Wight. Actually, when orders were pouring in for wind turbines, we desperately need more of this green energy. Production was booming, so it wasn't down to demand. They shut the plant because it was actually cheaper to produce them in America. So yet again, socially useful product was no longer manufactured because of the drive for profit, and lots of people lost their jobs. And we would immediately stop harmful and dangerous processes like fracking. We would invest in green energy, actually, and you can start to see how we could create 1 million climate jobs. Because central to this idea of socialism is the idea that working class people should run every aspect of society and actually develop their own democratic organisations. Now it seems like we could never get there actually, we're told all the time, aren't we, that, like I said, working class people, we have no skills, we have nothing to offer. But in fact, actually, working class people organise themselves all the time, don't they? They organise their own political movements, both in the day-to-day, but also in wider political struggles. I mean, you can see this in Russia's Soviets, but, in fact, in every mass uprising, there have been similar bodies. Workers coming together at the point of exploitation and shaping the struggle. And Marx and Engels actually base their understanding on the way that actually, once engaged in struggle, workers do create their own organisations to help fight their fight. They might start smaller, they might start as strike committees that are kind of busy organising the picket or whatever, but what they can grow in confidence and organisation and take on, those at the top, or maybe take on the trade union leadership if things aren't going the way they want. This is a dynamic process and kind of can gain, and it can also lose momentum as well. And at the height of struggle, you can see how workers will form networks, they'll form committees that actually become part of the struggle itself. Maybe they'll take charge of distributing food, or actually defending the revolution. So actually, they begin to represent the living interests of workers. And these revolutionary councils can form the basis for a new way of organising society. Now, the ideal situation for this to happen would be for socialist revolution to occur absolutely simultaneously in each country all over the world. But most of us are used to organising in situations that aren't ideal, are we? So I'll go through what will probably actually happen. Experiences from the past show that actually revolutionary breakthroughs happen in one country at a time, and it becomes a huge task of the revolution revolutionaries to make sure that it spreads. Actually, it's of utmost importance that this happens, because just to be clear, we don't think socialism can be built in one country alone. I mean, maybe you could hold out for some time, but it cannot be sustained in this way. And that is because as long as international capitalism exists, they're going to try and crush us. They'll stop at nothing actually to bring it down. Maybe with military intervention or economic pressure. And actually, what this means is that the socialist state will have to defend itself against invading armies or economic embargoes, or actually the socialist state will have to start competing with capitalism on capitalist terms, which means a competitive struggle actually to accumulate capital. So we're not just talking about a revolution in one country, as difficult as that might seem. What we're talking about is actually international revolution. This is a huge job, isn't it? How how do we get there? I mean, the first thing to say is that capitalism is international, which actually makes the crisis in capitalism international too. And any socialist revolution in one country will have a huge impact. The revolution in 1917, it sent shockwaves across the globe. And actually workers from far afield as kind of Glasgow or Seattle took inspiration from the revolution. The existence of real workers' power and workers' democracy, this is going to cause an ideological crisis in the ruling class across the world. I mean, the impacts that actually having existing workers' power will be absolutely inspirational for all workers. You know, actually I think there's going to be increased unity and energy because we're going to see what revolutionary tactics actually work to achieve victory. The workers' state won't impose revolution by invading other countries, but actually we're going to appeal to workers to overthrow their own rulers. You know, this means that we'll need an international revolutionary movement to kind of coordinate revolutionaries and unite them. And it's feasible to see a position where you could have a kind of revolutionary domino effect happening across the world. I mean, I think this all sounds quite difficult, doesn't it? In some ways, it sounds like a lot of work. And I think socialists are often the first to talk about how rubbish work is under capitalism, isn't it? But actually, we think that work has the potential to be very different to how it is now, because work is central to human life. And under socialism, labour will be completely transformed. The way in which a society works to produce goods is the foundation for all its social and political relations. Under capitalism, work is generally a negative experience. It's boring, exhausting a lot of the time, humiliating. And actually, it's the work of ordinary people that affords the rich their lives of luxury, but denies the working class any kind of quality of life. We keep capitalism function, don't we? We keep it absolutely functioning on a day-to-day basis, and this fact is not lost, I think, on huge layers of working class people. And central to a future socialist society will be this transformation of work, which will be changed by workers' control. And there are three ideas for how this might be. First of all, I think you can say that there would be a reduction in the working week. You know, now we see, it's so logical to have people having to work two or three jobs, while others, are unemployed or find it difficult to get work or surviving on 0 hours contracts or, part-time work. I think actually work can be shared more equally, and what this does is it reduces the working week and it allows workers more time to kind of develop educationally, culturally, and take an active part in these sort of emerging workers' democracy. Secondly, I think you can say that automation actually will get rid of a lot of jobs. I was talking to someone about this a while ago, and he said, I used to have a job cleaning underneath a bread oven, like in a bread factory. He spent his whole working day like on his hands and knees, like scooping up bread crumbs or whatever. Actually, his boss has decided that it's cheaper to pay someone on the minimum wage than it is to buy and maintain some sort of robot or device that could do that. But thirdly, I think labour is not going to be divided the way that it is now, actually between the kind of the thinkers and the doers, which reflects a class society, because under socialism, everyone will become both a planner and a producer of production. And because workers will have a direct say about what houses are built or what food is produced, it's actually their enthusiasm and their knowledge and creativity will shape the work environment. Because when people know that their kind of, their input and their knowledge is used to improve people's lives and make work easier for people, and not just to put money in the boss's pockets, actually it's going to be a pleasure to kind of intervene in that collaborative environment. That's not to say we can get rid of all jobs that are kind of boring or difficult. I mean, toilets are still going to need to be cleaned under capitalism, but actually they need to be cleaned now, don't they? And just what happens is people with the poorest paying conditions actually end up doing it. I think we could share these kind of jobs out. I think actually everyone would need to clean the toilets for maybe 1 or 2 days of the year. So we can see how people will start to have more time now that they're not kind of having to work a 60-hour week or whatever. And this is going to have a massive impact on people, on individuals, because actually the revolution is going to awaken like a huge thirst for knowledge in people, because during the revolution workers are in charge of everything and people's horizons are broadened. And I think one challenge of the workers' state is going to have to be developing an education system that actually taps into this and develops people's desire to learn, not completely crush it like the Tories and others are trying to do with our schools. We're not going to see anything like the current education system, where you have maybe Theresa May is trying to bring back grammar schools. Obviously we have the private school system here. Actually schools these days are more like exam factories, aren't they? This actually reproduces the class structure of society. And under socialism, education is not going to be structured in a way where those destined for the top jobs, either through difficult examinations or through entrance fees, are going to be separated. Because socialist education is about teaching everyone, not just the brightest few, and it's going to be about the all-round development of the human personality. And it's going to be run by the elected school council. It's not going to be run by the sort of head teacher. And it's also not going to be something that stops at 16 or 18. It will be a lifelong process. I mean, this comes alongside, quite an amazing, a broader sort of explosion of culture. We can see all sorts of, you can see a situation where you see new types of drama, art, poetry, and so on. And this comes alongside a new audience for all of this, isn't it? Because for the first time, people will have an opportunity to actually engage in it and enjoy it. And art is not just going to be something for the privileged few, but instead will be something for everyone to express themselves culturally. It's worth mentioning a little bit, just a bit about the state, because I think often people have a bit of a misunderstanding about what Marxists think and say about the state. Because as it stands, the ruling class know that as long as they maintain control of the means of production, the freedoms they allow us are actually, they're quite restricted, aren't they? And almost meaningless some of the time. So, we're allowed to vote every so often, aren't we? But I think as we can see from the last general election, but also the EU referendum before that, often these votes are about strengthening the power of the ruling class, some sections of the ruling class actually, and not actually about real choice. We're fighting for a world free of the supervision of the state. The state is a body of domination and oppression. Engels said that the state consisted of bodies of armed men, a means in which one section of society forcibly holds down another. And at present, the state is an instrument for maintaining a world of exploitation. I like to think of the worker state as a bit of a flip side for that. I think it's going to be an instrument from the majority for suppressing the minority of exploiters and creating and facilitating the needs of the new socialist society. To get rid of the state, there will have to be the international victory of the socialist revolution, the abolition of class relations, and an abundance of material goods. In reality, the state as we know it will have begun to lose its essential functions already. The revolution will initiate the process of ending women's oppression. How will this sort of happen? It's worth going through a few ideas. There's going to have to be legal measures, outlawing discrimination. Like after the Russian Revolution, very quickly legal decisions were made. The right to contraception and abortion, divorce, the right to equal pay and job opportunities. But unlike in capitalist society, where some of these things exist already, there's going to be wider social movement accompanying it. So there's going to be anti-sexist teaching in schools. There's going to be a transformation in ownership of the media. So, exploitative images of women won't be used anymore. It's going to become a force for anti-sexism rather than to entrench divisions in society. These are all important things, but actually the most important is the role that the family plays. Because actually the position of women within the family and the wider ideological role that plays in class society, that is actually the heart of women's oppression. Because today, the raising of children often is the responsibility of women. And actually, this arrangement is very useful for capitalism because it gets the next generation of workers raised for free. People go, they enter into the workforce at 16, 18 or whenever, socialised, healthy and ready to work. I mean, it's not that we want to kind of rip children from their mother's arms. We're not looking to abolish the family unit overnight. But I think a lot of what the family does, we can do together. Actually, I think the caring of children can be done collectively. I think there's going to be community nurses, nurseries, creche facilities, restaurants, laundries, and so on. So actually, the burden of domestic labour, which people, often women, do replicate inside each isolated house individually, I think we can do this as a community. And actually child rearing, which today can be, it can be, expensive, can't it? And it can be quite isolating and tedious. It's not going to be that anymore. It's going to be an overwhelmingly positive experience. Economic considerations are not going to be a factor when people decide if they want to have children. You're also not going to see something like, Theresa May's cap on child benefit, to say that you can only, you only get child benefit on a maximum of 2 children. Because actually the caring of children will be a matter of purely personal choice, unrestricted by social norms. Because actually we think alongside women's liberation, you will also see the liberation of LGBT plus people. Because we're going to leave behind the bourgeois family, and we're going to get real achievement and the achievement of real equality for women that will actually remove the basis for homophobia, actually, because a world in which the family no longer needs to be defended will mean a world in which LGBT people are not perceived as a threat. Because true sexual liberation, not the kind offered to us through strip clubs and pole dancing, because that will happen when people can make real decisions about their sort of sexuality, free from the moral restrictions of capitalism and demands placed on them from the nuclear family. And the Socialist Revolution, alongside this, will tear up the roots of racism, because it does have roots in capitalist society. Like all oppressions, there's nothing biological or inherent about racism, and it is the specific product of the rise and the development of the capitalist system, which was developed as an ideological justification for the slave trade, further bolstered by imperialism. And because capitalism doesn't just rest on competition between bosses, but also between workers, these divisions are encouraged by an opportunistic or bigoted ruling class, and racism acts as a convenient scapegoat for all social ills. So socialism will remove the material basis for these oppressions and prejudice. The process of revolution and of building a socialist society will itself break down these prejudices. In the SWP, when we talk about socialism, we're not talking about Stalinism. We're talking about a society created by, shaped by and run on behalf of ordinary people. Socialism from below. Because actually we think socialism would be the most profoundly democratic society imaginable. We don't have to completely start from scratch. Like I said, we can point to some examples in which people have organised themselves in the past. And in fact, a lot of our ideas do come from this, from Russia, or from the Arab Spring, or from the Paris Commune. These examples of what ordinary people are capable of when there is a mainstream, when there is a mass movement. And I think often we are told by the mainstream that it's impossible, isn't it? That socialism is totally impossible, or or maybe undesirable. Actually, maybe we don't. It's possible we don't quite want it. We're told that everyone's going to look the same under socialism. We're all going to wear whatever blue boiler suits, and we're all going to be called the same name, and we're all going to have exactly the same haircut. I don't think that's true. Actually, I think socialism offers up the type of society where people have real choice about the way that they live their lives that they are not afforded under capitalism. Because when you have a society that is built for us, not just by us, but for us, in our interests, actually that's a society that celebrates difference between people. We're also told that it's going to lead to sort of tyranny, to this awful way of living. I don't think that's true, actually, because I think socialism, as we see it, This is the highest point of democracy with the greatest potential for a peaceful world. We're also told, aren't we, that there's not enough to go around, that poverty and hunger and inequality is just part of life, and that's the way that it has to be. I don't think that's true, actually. You know, I think capitalism is, I almost can't think of a more wasteful way to organise the world. Actually, I think there is enough to go around, and I think we have the potential to create it under socialism, because when you put people, when you put human needs and human beings at the centre of production, you don't get the wasteful practices under capitalism. But also it's the process of revolution as well that will transform society. Because a revolutionary process doesn't just change society, but it changes the individuals themselves. You know, because it's not just about where we end up, is it? It's about how we get there. And that comes down to the strength of the mass movement. But actually, I do think we have the potential to create a much better world, an ecologically sustainable world, free of exploitation and oppression, free of climate change, disaster, and all of that. And actually, I think, you know, a working class that has gone through the revolutionary movement has the potential to create this society anew.
Well, I think, what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah made some really good points. What I was thinking was that I wanted to get into sort of the specifics of sort of how the democratic system would work. Because if you look at sort of current or you know, Cold War era socialist states, you had a very sort of indirect democracy. So you would sort of have workers' councils from the council level electing the you know, at the national level, and there wouldn't be direct votes. It would just be, you know, sort of a bit like the electoral college. There's also other things. For example, do we need to nationalise hot dog stands? You know, and all like minor things. Is there, how much centralisation and how much decentralisation is there going to be? That was my question.
Great, thank you.
So
I'm going to come back at the end, if that's okay.
Thank you.
I'm not in a party now. I remain a Marxist, in my own mind anyway. But one of the biggest worries for me has always been when I looked at Chile, more recently Venezuela, we've seen revolutionary rehearsal, Portugal, Greece. Capitalism will not simply let us build socialism country after country after country. The odds of it happening simultaneously are, I don't know, quite big. But we have to learn lessons from Chile. I mean, you know, initially they were going to split the armed forces. The Cordones, the embryonic Soviets, should have been allowed to blossom. We will need to certainly have a democratic revolution within the armed forces. We need soldiers who can think and not just simply discuss sex all day long and various other things. They need to actually be able to look at people as human beings, make decisions for themselves. Democratic election of officers, deciding, you know, if they're going to aid other states. And the way that we see Cuba, for all the distortion to Cuba, for all the Stalin and all the rest of Cuba, helped in South Africa, in Guanacavalli, and actually give the South African apartheid army a good kicking in the process. We see what's happening in Venezuela post-Chavez, Pilger's program on that, how capitalism still allowed, with American support, to sabotage everything. The huge advances that Chavez government made in literacy and numeracy, people in their 80s being able to read, to be able to write, people in far-flung areas of Venezuela. We understand the powers that capitalism has. We understand that they'll try to sabotage us within and without, ideologically and physically. So, comrades, we bear this in mind, don't we, all the time? Just how ruthless our enemy is, and we must be equally ruthless with them.
We've got a couple of contributions at the back. So the person to the left. Sorry. Oh, and then the next one after that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for that eloquent presentation. I came in quite late, but I think I had enough of what you said. And I would like to situate my own, argument within the context of, the Brexit and the American election, with the emergence of, Donald Trump and the the building of wall between America and Mexico, the fencing, the blocking of immigrants coming into U.S., and also what we are seeing in Britain now, the Brexit and all of that. We don't want immigrants anymore. And coming from the socialist background, of which I so much have faith in. All right. I just want to know how possible is it for us to achieve all the lofty ideas of socialism in this, two superpower worlds today, all right? Take Britain and take America, for instance, all right? So I just want to know, because socialism, to my mind, is for everybody. It's a kind of bridge across, boundaries. It's it offers us the opportunity to have this shared humanity, all right? And I so much support that, but I'm a bit confused now that we have this kind of situation at hand at the moment, because the rest of the world looks up to Britain and America. I think, to my mind, they are the classical empires we refer to in post-colonial studies today. Thank you.
Comrades, I came in late, so I may be asking a question that's already been answered. So please forgive me, but I do have an important question, and it rises out of the experience of the Russian Revolution. In the struggle to achieve the revolution and take state power, how much does that corrupt and make more difficult the nature of the society we're going to correct? Because the evidence of the Russian Revolution, in our tradition, is that the decimation of the working class and its institutions in the struggle was a major step on the way to Stalinism. And we have to be very wary about what is going to happen. Now, somebody said earlier on, a few minutes ago, references to Cuba and Chavez and wherever. What we need is, democratic soldiers. Well, maybe revolutionary soldiers, yes, we would like whole regiments to mutiny and come across to us. That's different from having a democratic control of the military. I live in Essex, halfway between the Colchester garrison and London, and if London becomes, the London commune of 2020, the first thing that's going to happen is the regiments in Colchester are going to march down the A12 to destroy it. Seriously, that's what they're there for. Now, how do we win those soldiers to shoot their officers? Because that's what has to happen.
I've got an idea.
Sorry, can you go through the chair, please?
Pardon?
Can you go through the chair?
I was just going to... We've got a number of other people wanting to contribute, but we'll definitely ask you to come back to it. And if I could get another contribution from this coming here in the pink shirts, if you'd like to come on.
Yeah, I think just in terms of the military question, that's quite important. If you think back to Egypt, when things were kicking off, the Russian Revolution, the Egyptian Revolution, the Arab Spring and everything, then of course the army was sent in to try and crush the popular rebellion, and people lay down in front of tanks, people fraternised with soldiers, and it created a situation where it was next to impossible for them to do that, and the regime decided that rather than risk the real split driving through the military, that they would get rid of Mubarak. That's quite an important development. To understand that, it's important to say the difference between the army and the police, to think about the way in which the police are told that they have to impose order on society from above, whereas the army are trained to think that they need to go and kill the enemy, which are a different sort of people over there. When it comes to a mass popular movement inside your own country, the army can play a role in terms of pushing that down, but it's not necessarily the case that goes as smoothly as they like, and often things can run amok. And in terms of creating that popular movement and a sense of organisation at the heart of it,
someone raised the question about what the ways in which democracy can develop. I think it's important to look as far back as the Paris Commune, the way in which delegates were instantly recallable, that all aspects of the state was elected. These were crucial factors that meant that it couldn't just be the case that corruption could carry on and develop in a way that the democratic organs see themselves as above society. They see themselves as completely unaccountable to society. In large sense, that's what we have in Parliament here. That the revolutionary movement, through its own struggle, creates organisations that can carry through democratically the struggle forward, and also, crucially, as part of a revolution, bring together productive questions, bring together economic questions as well.
Well, just say, when I'm tapping, that means 2 minutes. There is a little bit more time for people to use. But after this comrade, we've got the comrade in the red shirt and then the comrade in the checkered shirt just here.
I think the meeting's a useful title, isn't it? It's called What Would Socialism Look Like? And I think it's because we dare to dream about that it's a really important meeting. And the discussion has become inevitably about, at the minute, how do we get there and what are the pitfalls of it, and the two things do go hand in hand, but there's some major contradictions in that, because often as socialists we get accused of being totally looking at a utopian society and saying what might it look like on the one hand, and then at the same time these questions come up about, well, how do we try and navigate that, and people always fall back into looking at existing examples. We don't have an example because we haven't had a global socialist revolution and capitalism still exists, and so we need to have a theoretical understanding about what the state is, what its operation is underneath capitalism, and how it oppresses us in order to be able to get to where we want to get to. And all of the examples that people have thrown up are full of the limitations of trying to operate by adopting the existing state apparatus, working inside a market condition, and all the rest of it. I want to focus on where we're going, because getting there is going to rely on more and more groups of people understanding and having a discussion about those ideas about what we want. And I think we haven't talked too much about alienation, really, and I think we're quite alienated in the capitalist world. We're detached from the production process. That does very strange things to us in terms of all the examples that have come up, like looking at pornography, or feeling like we don't want to be detached from our workplace to our home life. And I think these examples are quite interesting in how we throw those things off, basically. So, I want to talk about William Morris, who said that the factory, won't look like it does underneath the current situation. That people's work life wouldn't be any distinction from their leisure time, because we'd so much enjoy putting ourselves and our efforts into the society that we were building. And we have to look beyond all of the current structures that are built on the system that we have. Housing would look nothing like it does. Would we even have schools? Would we even have art galleries distinct from something else? And all these things would probably, I hope, come together. We can't be prescriptive about it, but we have to dare to dream about those sorts of things and feel and have faith that people will be liberated in the process. You can see in the very small little chinks of people beginning to get organised around the Corbyn movement that people share ideas, feel a bit more confident, all of those sort of things. Imagine what it would be like if people started winning real victories against the bosses and the capitalists and the very small minority of people who control us all the time. I think we can see a world where actually we can dare to dream and have the confidence and in each other that we can push forward, not just for a revolution in one country, but that will spread and we can build it in lots of different places at the same time.
I'm going to ask these two colleagues to come up in pairs. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to what the friend raised about what do we do in the UK and the US, the sort of belly of the beast of capitalism, because I think Sarah's right to start by saying that actually socialism is back on the agenda in these countries. Last year, Bernie Sanders got 13.5 million votes, I think, to be the Democrat candidate for the election. This is someone who identifies as a socialist. Here, Corbyn, to get 40% of the vote in the election, putting forward socialist policies, I think it's immensely positive. And I think we have to recognise the significance of it, because all my life I've been told that socialist ideas are unpopular, that socialism is something from history, from a prehistoric age, and that if you put it to people now, they won't like it, they'll reject it. Actually, that's been proven to be wrong. That has been proven to be completely wrong. And actually, one of the best consequences of that war is the scare that it's given to the establishment. The establishment at the moment are terrified about what to do about Corbyn. The Guardian columnists, if you read them, they have been having to eat humble pie about why it is that they couldn't see what was happening with Corbyn, why it is that Corbyn was popular. You look at the Tories in the moment, they're in disarray. There's a left-wing challenger to number 10, and the Tories are falling over themselves to make U-turn after U-turn and so on. But I guess the question for us is, how do we not just give the establishment a scare, but how do we actually get rid of the establishment? How do we start to try and get towards that society that Sarah talks about? Because clearly there's a mood for that, but how do we shift that more than just the scare of the establishment, but actually to delivering to that society? And I think one of the big things we have to ask is, if Corbyn became Prime Minister, what would the establishment do? They would use their old friends in the banks, in the big companies, in the civil service, in the courts, in the army and so on, and they would try and bring him down. They would try and cripple his administration. You can learn throughout history that this is what they do. So that raises the question for us, what do we do about these people? What do we do about the banks, the courts, the civil service and so on? Because they're outside the power of Parliament. They're not elected. We don't get to vote on them. We don't get a say on what they do. We don't vote for what regulations they bring in. And that's why I think we always talk about building a movement from below, building a movement on the streets, in the workplaces, campaigns and so on. It would be fantastic to get Corbyn to number 10, but that will only be the start of the battle. If we're really going to take on the people who aren't under our power at the moment, then we are going to have to build a much wider movement that goes way beyond Parliament. And that's why I think if you're a socialist today and fighting for that kind of society that Sarah talked about, I think yes, it's supporting Corbyn, it's taking huge enthusiasm from the election result and so on, but also it's about building resistance, wherever you're based. It's about supporting strikes, supporting struggles and so on. So I'll leave it there.
Before I bring your comrade, we've got a comrade here in the black shirt, and then possibly if you want to come back in. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name's Tom. I'm a member of the SWP in Haringey. I think it's really interesting when you have a meeting like this that one of the questions that inevitably is thrown up is the sense of ideological crisis that exists in society today, and also how scary it is, how frightening it can be at times when you look at Trumpism, you look at the acid attacks which have been happening in East London against Muslim people and that kind of thing, right? It can be frightening. And, as the system goes into crisis, I think we see a process of polarisation taking place across the world. Ideas offered by Donald Trump, by Theresa May, who won't even give survivors of Grenfell who are illegal immigrants more than a year to stay in the country. And then you have ideas offered by Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, by ordinary people who you meet on the bus, to be honest. And, I think we have to think about how the solutions to those crises can be deepened. Because you see, when the system goes into crisis, ordinary people are forced to respond to it. Look at Grenfell. What a disgrace that it happened, right? But I think one of the most inspirational things about that disaster, if you can even call it that, was the response of ordinary people from across London and elsewhere who went straight into northwest London and organised aid when the government wouldn't do it. But you see, it shows you a really interesting thing. All the time, we are told we're worthless. We can't do nothing. We can't organise. Who organised for Grenfell? It was us. It wasn't them. They still won't do it. It was working class people. When the system went into crisis, working class people responded. And our basic premise is that ordinary people can run society. That is what socialism is about. It's about ordinary people responding to the crises of the system in order to try and build a new society. And you see, it's absolutely right what people have said about the fact there will be resistance to that process. I often imagine ringing up Theresa May. Theresa, we're taking all your money. You can imagine what a response will be. No, you're not, etc., right? Of course there'll be resistance. When Corbyn was elected, there was a military person anonymously said that we were going after them. We'd go after Corbyn, we'd launch a coup if he came for NATO, etc., etc. These are real things that we have to deal with. But this is where what Tom said earlier about the importance of a vision of where we're going is so important. Because most people don't accept the idea that working class people can run society. When it's your premise, when it's the thing that you are based on, the answer is always that ordinary people can solve the crisis, that we need more people involved and so on. And if you look at the Russian Revolution, a lot of people don't know, in August 1917, there was an attempted fascist coup launched to crush the revolution, and it was responded to by millions of workers and so on who went out on strike and organised and were able to defeat the coup. And through that process, people got the confidence to think that they could take power. And you see, Jeremy Corbyn, in his speech the other day, talks about the fact that we live in the age of imagination. We live in the age of imagination. And it's true. Oh, I've got to shut up, have I? Sorry. We live in the age of imagination, and we have to imagine a society where we take the response to Grenfell and run it deeper. We can run society. It's proven time and time again. Corbyn says for the many, not the few. I think we have to say by the many, against the few, because they are destroying our society.
Mine's just a question, really. In 1921, I think in Russia, the factions were banned, and also the socialist parties. Trotsky regretted that afterwards, calling it revolution trade and so on. In a socialist society, say here, I mean, what would the role of the party be? Would it be a pluralistic socialism? Would there be different parties? What would the role of the party be?
Thank you. And then we've got one last contribution.
Just one message. This time it's not a question but a message. I want to use the North African, revolution as an example, because the socialist struggle, the fight before us, is a huge one, and how to achieve it is still a big question for us. And I want to quote from this, Egyptian novelist Nawar el-Saadawi. During the Egyptian revolution, she had to say this to comrades, that look, if we die for the good of Egypt. If we survive for the good of Egypt. That alone spurs people into action. That the sick, the old, the young, everybody had to join the revolution. And the revolution was on until they achieved victory. So the take-home message for us today is that revolution until victory. Thank you.
So I think we've got one last contribution down here at the front.
I think if we get Corbyn elected, I expect to see a lot of confidence in the working class, and possibly, maybe, the establishment of strikes in Britain and beginning of the socialism from below, if you like. I mean, I recall in the 1970s going into a factory when I was on trial. I was a docker, and going to this factory that had been occupied by the workers themselves. I mean, if you've never experienced that, it's a fantastic feeling. They're running the factory, no managers, they've chucked them out. It's a wonderful feeling. So, also the world now. If you look at 1917, the Russian Revolution, I mean, it took 6 months to communicate between one part of Russia and another. Today, it's instant. Knowledge is kind of sweeps out straight away, and everybody absorbs it. So the system itself is much more integrated than it was in 1917. When there's a crisis of capitalism, it is a world crisis of capitalism. In the past, certain states went into crisis and came out while others were still going in. It's much more centralised now, and much more, our ability to deal with the revolution on a world scale, I think, is much more positive now than it was in the past. So I think the prospects are quite good. I think that the system itself is running into so many contradictions. We're all talking about, the driverless car. Imagine an automatic doctor. You don't go to the surgery, you go to a kiosk you put, you know, you say, describe your symptoms, they'll even book your bloody ambulance or whatever. And, you know, this is the world we're moving into. Capitalism cannot solve the problems that raises.
Thank you. Got one more contribution. Time for one more contribution at the back. If you'd like to come to the front.
Thank you very much. Really what I'd like to put to everyone is what I think is one way of framing this. We're talking about, you know, how liberating socialism can be. I think one aspect that we, you know, I haven't got a way of expressing it, but so I put it to you as a question, is how to emphasise that personal responsibility doesn't disappear. You know, when we're talking about liberation, we're still talking about, you know, acting as an engaged citizen that can handle, you know, not being coerced into action by a, you know, a profit-driven company. So, as, you know, the question that I put really to everybody is how to think about how to discuss things in terms of, you know, personal responsibility within a nice framework where there is collective responsibility. But that's it. Yeah, thank you.
I think that was everyone, but are there any last thoughts or contributions?
Yeah, we do have a bit more time if people want to chip in.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I guess it's like a really good point, like, about women's role in, like, revolution and socialism. Like, I think for me particularly, like, growing up in quite a sexist area of rural Australia, I've been told, like, you know, women can't lead, you know, you've got to be a mother. Quite very harsh, it's very backwards. But you know, actually, you see when throughout these, like, struggle, when the struggle increases, actually women are always at the forefront, and I think that's important to keep in mind. And actually, you know, since I've, you know, become a revolutionary, joined the SOP, actually I have felt like a leader for the first time, and I think that's important. Particularly, you know, when you look at Egypt, for example, actually you see Muslim women coming out and saying, "We are the women, we're the men," and, you know, Tahrir Square becoming, you know, a place where women could walk without getting harassed during the revolution, became a place where families would stay overnight. And so, and you think back to Russia 1917, where there was actually communal kitchens organised, so actually so women could be freed up and actually go out into the struggle. It was important that they were at the forefront. So I just wanted to make that point really. I think it's very important, the role that we play, and actually overcoming our oppression during that process as well.
The friend over there asked about what would actually working class democracy look like, and I think that's really cuts to the heart of what, you know, what is our vision of what is our vision of socialism. Because I think what you have under capitalism is there's a sort of this separation between politics and economics. So we're told that we live in a democratic society because you can vote every 4 years for a politician, but just because even if you voted Corbyn in, you wouldn't have control over, you wouldn't elect your boss in your workplace, you wouldn't actually have control over what goes on there, and much more broadly within, you know, who gets allocated social housing, all of these sorts of questions. And I think what you saw initially within Russia was a really direct form of democracy where you had either factory councils, it could be their neighbourhoods, you know, really mass meetings coming together, known as the Soviets, the workers' councils. What we then saw much later on in Russia is these things were actually, the power was taken away from them. So when people think about socialism and the Soviet Union, it is very indirect. There wasn't an actual democracy because it wasn't really run on that sort of basis. And really, you know, I think there's two ways of looking at socialism. There was a US socialist, Hal Draper, and he said, you know, there's this vision of socialism from above and socialism from below. Socialism from above, you can say we're going to elect a government which can nationalise a few things and will give us better rights at work, will give us better rights in our neighbourhoods, but actually what really our vision is that it's about working class people liberating themselves, and I think that's really, you know, this is where, you know, we break all those kind of old prejudices. I mean,
just one example, I was on a picket line of 1,000 cleaners who were out on strike in East London. These are migrants, largely women from Nigeria, from Eastern Europe. People are always told that you're undercutting wages, you're too stupid to run society, you can't actually do anything. And these were people out on strike, chanting, the Workers United will never be defeated. And actually through that process of actually striking, they start to actually, by organising the strike, you can see that they're actually taking control over just small aspects of their lives. And it's through those kind of, helping those kind of struggles grow, is that actually, you could see those people running the hospital deciding how the hell they're going to actually organise, they have a list of 57 things to do each day in a space of 4 hours. Now they say, look, we can't do that, so they would organise how that's done and take on much broader sense of how you actually take decisions within society as a whole, so at every sort of level, and therefore you have a very sort of direct link of democracy. It wouldn't be about electing someone who then goes off and does whatever they want. It would be about them, you have the power to direct what those kind of representative bodies have to do, at every level, at every time. You could recall people, all these kind of things. I think it's about saying that it's about having, it's another way of working class people having power from below, as opposed to electing people to do things on our behalf.
I've now got my sense of time back to do the last contribution.
Okay. I'm Linda. You can tell from my accent, I'm from Canada. And I wanted to support the direction of the last comment and say that when it comes to imagining what socialism would be like, we usually think in terms of what would it be like for me. And think about it, we are raised, even those of us who come from a middle class background, are raised to think, oh, well, if you're a woman, you can only go this far, and then you hit the glass ceiling. And I recall what it took for me to be able to stand up in front of people and talk. The first time I went into a classroom, I recall so clearly standing outside thinking, you can do this, Linda, you can do this, and not believing that I was ready or capable of actually teaching things to other people. And I don't know whether I was or not, but walking into that classroom and having other people treat me like what I said was worth listening to changed how I felt about myself. And I think that's what happens on strikes when you're on the picket line and people are walking around and they are being treated by one another as if they can create something worthwhile. And that is that micro relationship that is so important, because in effect, ultimately for us, capitalism is a set of relationships, is a system of relationships that say there are those that deserve and those that only deserve to provide for those that deserve. And what we want to do is strike at that, and the way that we do it is by treating one another, however the opportunities arise, treating one another as people who can create a new society. And if we look at one another that way, that's that one teeny more step. And as that builds, and anybody who's been in a strike situation that has won has felt that sense of ability to make something different happen. So.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks everyone for that really great discussion. Really, I mean, I think it's really telling actually that one of the themes that really shines through is that of workers' democracy actually. And I think the potential for ordinary people deciding at every layer of society is actually very, very exciting. Just in terms of nationalisation, would we nationalise hot dog stands or whatever? I mean, I'm of the position that I don't think bosses are going to exist under socialism. So we are going to have. I want workers' control everywhere. Really, if there's a group of people or whatever and they want to run a hot dog stand. Fine, but I don't want one of them to be exploiting the others in the same way that bosses would. If an individual, you can see a situation where individuals will do these things. If people want to, sell hot dogs or whatever, then that's up to them, and that's fine. I quite like hot dogs actually. I think I'm quite hungry. I'm talking about food a lot. Yeah, just in terms of what democracy would actually look like. I mean, I think the banning of parties in 1921 was intended to be a temporary measure. I think the revolution at that time was incredibly isolated and it was under pressure. The revolution was being organised against, wasn't it, by the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries, and the revolution was actually hanging by a thread, so it was a temporary emergency measure to hold on to it. I mean, basically socialism is actually, it's totally about pluralism, like more so than we get under capitalism. We are going to see a flourishing of political ideas under socialism as well. I mean, a few people have kind of talked about, the impacts that struggle has on people, and I think, I do think you have to mention that actually, because the process of revolution turns things upside down. Everything that is solid melts into air. It's through this process that people experience the power of themselves. We talk about the working class not just suffering discrimination and oppression, but actually having agency, and actually feeling the power, like as a collective unit, but also as individuals. People come into conflict with all sorts of prejudiced ideas that they have about society. They throw off the muck of ages, all the crap that we're told about ourselves and other people under capitalism is really shown in sharp contrast. And I think it's absolutely right that even under capitalism, people have to confront ideas about themselves, like getting up and speaking in a classroom. You're told all sorts of things as a working class woman that you have nothing important to say a lot of the time, and I think that's something that everyone has to confront. I mean, the comrades that talked about the international element of capitalism are absolutely right. I think the fact that Russia 1917 had such an impact across the world, and still today actually, shows that what it does to see real kind of workers' power. But think about how long it took to get information across the world then. Now we have it instantly, don't we? We can have it in a moment. We know exactly what's going on in other countries. I mean, whoever talked about sort of being an individual, responsible individual is right, I think. People, the capitalists, and they tell us that the reason why we behave a certain way is because we don't want to get in trouble with them. Like, I don't really buy that. The effects that peer pressure and like social pressure plays is like really, really important actually. Groups self-regulate, like I don't know who's seen like Secret Life of 4, 5 and 6-year-olds, right? But they do this like test on them where they're like, there's like 4-year-old kids and they're like, don't eat the chocolate cake, right? And then this group of children have to like self-regulate themselves and they relate to each other in that way. I mean, just to finish really. Just to finish, I mean, I think a few people have spoken about the Barts cleaners, but they are a group of migrant workers who are currently on strike, basically for 30p extra an hour, and they are really waging quite an inspirational and amazing battle. I mean, I think the stakes of what we're talking about is really, really, really high, actually. I think something like Grenfell, who someone else talked about, that shows how high these stakes are. We are not living in a society, in a world that is built for our interests. We are living in a world that is built for the interests of the very, very few. And the class struggle is not something that we invent. So we can hold meetings like this or whatever. It's something that is actually happening all around us. And I think what's brilliant is when we talk about what could a socialist society look like, is we talk about our strength as the working class and our strength as revolutionaries, because human beings have always challenged the status quo. They've always challenged the system. Like I said, it wasn't Karl Marx who sort of invented that. It's always happening in whichever ways human beings organise themselves. And I think it's fantastic that so many people are identifying as socialists. I think it's incredibly important to challenge the system and themselves in that way. But actually, I think people should be revolutionaries. Like, I think we need a revolution to create a future socialist society, because it is only through that process that we will be fit to build it. It's only through that process that we will be the right architects of a socialist society. So it's great you've come to this meeting. It's your first meeting of Marxism. I feel like it sets a lot of challenges out for us as like activists. But if you're not a revolutionary, you should be a revolutionary, because we currently live in a society where working class people are being burned alive because they're not building houses that are fit for us. So I hope you all enjoy the next few days of discussion and debate, and I'll leave it there.